Hey there, this is Natalie, and now we've had the final chapter of Arc 6, plus some extra information around the blood of the dragon. I think it's a good time to take a look at what some of the biggest mysteries this fantastic arc has left us with are. Just as an aside, I just wasn't able to keep covering the chapters as they came out and still keep my other content coming, and I feel like at this point there are plenty of other chapter summaries available, both in written and YouTube form, so I probably won't be doing the full chapter breakdowns I did for chapters 80 to 84 for the final 6 chapters of the arc. I feel like it's more interesting at this point to talk about what the ending of the arc could mean for the rest of the story and things like that, rather than just what the content of the chapters is. So I'm sorry if you were enjoying those Google Translate videos I was doing, but if you do want to check out good video summaries of the rest of Arc 6 and the extra bits about the dragon blood, check out Jake's123's channel. I'll put a link to him in the description. He was getting chapter summaries out on the days they were released, like an absolute beast, and his videos will fill you in on the events of the last chapters of Arc 6 if you don't know them yet. So, assuming you are now all caught up, I'm making a series about the biggest mysteries Arc 6 has left us with, and some general ideas, background lore, and theories around them. And in this first video on ReZero Arc 6 mysteries, I want to talk about a very good girl. So, in chapter 90, Volcanica recognised Patrasche and called her by her name. This is very weird for a number of reasons. For one thing, Subaru named Patrasche. Her name comes from the titular dog in an old anime movie from 1997 called A Dog of Flanders, and the theme song from that movie was also used as Subaru's ringtone. Back in the days of Arc 3, this seemed like just a reference, another way to show us early on that Subaru was into his otaku stuff, but it seems like now there was more importance to it. It seems highly unlikely that Volcanica, in his senile state, has found out the ground dragon's name in the year since Subaru named her. After all, he didn't know Emilia wasn't Satella, so it doesn't seem like he's been keeping an eye on the factions involved in the royal selection or anything like that. So, is this another Flugel thing? Was Flugel also a fan of A Dog of Flanders? Was there some kind of prophecy from long ago that there would be a black ground dragon named Patrasche? Or does Volcanica know this ground dragon specifically, or one just like her, who had the same name? Well, there could be a clue in some lore. The place where Volcanica first met Reid Astrea and Shaula was a location in southern Lagunica called Flanders. Here, Volcanica is said to have blessed the earth, allowing for earth or ground dragons to be born. Volcanica is said to have created all 3 of the lesser dragon types we know about. The ground dragons like Patrasche, the water dragons like those we see in Arc 5 in Pristella, and the flying dragons we've seen mentioned, which some people in Wallachia are able to tame and ride around on, like Daenerys Targaryen. I'm hoping we get some dragon riders in Arc 7, where Wallachia is expected to feature heavily. So, if there was somebody around at that time, though it was 400 years ago in ReZero's world, who was from modern Japan, and they perhaps took one of these new earth dragons that had just come forth from Flanders, well, naming their dragon of Flanders after A Dog of Flanders would certainly seem like the obvious thing to do. We can kind of get the idea that Flugel was not from 400 years ago in our world by a number of things, but perhaps the thing that gives us the clearest date range on him is the fact that Shaula in the web novel once uses the expression "OK Google," which she presumably got from her master, Flugel. Someone who left our world at a time when Google existed as a mainstream brand would most likely have been from at least the early 2000s, because while Google was founded in 1998, it didn't become the ubiquitous name synonymous with search engines until a few years later. However, even the date it was founded is still later than the release of A Dog of Flanders, so an otaku who knew about Google would be likely to know about the character of Patrasche. Interestingly though, Shaula doesn't just mention the word Google, she says, "OK Google," and this may just be something the translator did, so don't attach too much to me saying this, given I can't read Japanese. But while Google has existed since the late 90s, OK Google is a phrase associated with using the Google voice assistant, which would place whoever taught Shaula to say this into the smartphone era. Someone isekai'd 18 years before Subaru, like Al would have been if time moved at the same speed in both worlds, would not know that phrase. So is this a sign that Flugel was taken from our world later than Al? Or is time so much faster in ReZero's world that 400 years ago when Flugel was taken was as recent as, say, 2010 in our world, when smartphone voice assistants were becoming a thing? Meaning Al, who's been in this world for 18 years, was actually taken just moments before Subaru. Again, meaning that in our world, Al and Subaru were about the same age. We are expecting to find out a lot more about Al in Arc 7, and since I'm the thirst for Al information incarnate, I need this to happen because these kind of questions keep me up at night. But anyway, back to A Dog of Flanders and Patrasche. If we theorise that Flugel then had a black ground dragon of the Diana race, same as our girl, and it was named Patrasche, it's likely this would be a ground dragon Volcanica knew, because she was one of the first he created. Did Subaru then pick out the same race of ground dragon when Krush let him choose one, and give her the same name, because of the same reference? If so, this seems like rather more than a coincidence, given Subaru didn't know ground dragons originated in a place called Flanders when he named her. It feels like the kind of coincidence along the lines of Subaru having the name he does, a name that his parents in our world gave him, but which made him become interested in astronomy, and therefore know the star-related information that's helpful in this world. A name that refers to the same constellation as the name of the Pleiades Watchtower, all of it hinting to an extremely deep connection between Subaru and Flugel. An alternative theory to Subaru and Flugel having ground dragons of the same type with the same name is that Subaru's Patrasche is actually the very same ground dragon that Volcanica created and Flugel named after the Dog of Flanders. This seems unlikely given that ground dragons are said to only live for 100 years or so, and it would be quite a coincidence for a ground dragon with such an esteemed history to have ended up as just one of a bunch of dragons Krush Karsten had available. If we assume Patrasche is the same as all the other ground dragons then, this means that if Subaru's Patrasche knew Volcanica 400 years ago, it would not be because she was born then and had lived until now, but because of, I guess, some kind of time travel thing, either with Subaru's Patrasche eventually going back in time with Subaru and meeting an earlier version of Volcanica, or a Patrasche created by Volcanica and named by Flugel at Flanders, being transported to some point in the future, ready to meet Subaru. I think the latter makes more sense in the context of Patrasche because it really seems like her name ties in with her creation, rather than just being a name Subaru chose just because it was a name he liked for a pet, that just happened to end up being super on the nose. Still though, I know there are a lot of people who theorise various things involving Subaru eventually going back in time to the Age of Witches, and so this could fall in with that too. Now, another option is that while ground dragons don't normally live for more than 100 years, perhaps Patrasche is special. Certainly, if she was one of the first ground dragons Volcanica created, then, well, maybe he made some special ones who were supposed to lead all the others or something, which lived longer. If he's a god dragon making whole new races of lesser dragons, all of which, by the way, are born with divine protections, it doesn't really seem like a stretch that he might be able to especially bless some of them. So is there anything to suggest that Patrasche is kind of a chosen one among dragons, beyond being the one that Subaru chose? Well, not really. Patrasche is always shown to be a very good ground dragon, but the only thing that surprises people about her is generally her loyalty to Subaru, despite her race of ground dragons, Diana, which is apparently a fairly rare type, being prideful and difficult to work with. We know she's intelligent, but whilst Subaru is often surprised by this, given in his frame of reference he was probably expecting her to be something similar to a horse intelligence-wise, and she seems to have a much more complex grasp on things than he'd expect a horse to have. However, outside of Subaru, her level of intelligence is praised, but not particularly surprising to Otto, who can actually talk to her, or to other people who are used to ground dragons. In fact, just before the final chapter, we have Lebat and Kaitos thinking about how he wishes he could eat ground dragons because Patrasche has admirable qualities. He can only eat humans, but his thoughts do tell us something about how ground dragons compare to humans in general, in terms of their personalities and intellect, and it doesn't seem like they're vastly inferior. I get the impression that Patrasche is a good dragon, but not one that's vastly different from others of her kind. We see her as very special, but only in the same way I see my 2 cats as very special and awesome. Otto probably thinks his Frufu, who has been very loyal to him, is just as special as Patrasche. So I'm not getting from what we know about her that there's any reason to think she's some kind of queen of ground dragons favoured by her creator. I don't think it's likely then that she's a one-off case that's been alive 4 times longer than usual. Now, there are a couple of other theories that could explain Volcanica knowing Patrasche's name, but I think these would actually be kind of disappointing if they turn out to be correct, because they would mean no real history or connection. One would be that as the creator of all the lesser dragons, Volcanica is a living god for them. They could perhaps pray to him, and maybe he hears their prayers and has a connection to every living ground dragon in the world. Patrasche may love the name she was given by Subaru and use that for herself in her own mind, so as a dragon deity, that's what Volcanica sees her identity as. When he called out her name, perhaps it was not in surprised recognition of someone he once knew. Perhaps he was just surprised to see one of his ground dragons in this place and called out the name he knew this one by. Alternatively, well, perhaps Patrasche said something to him when she and Ram entered the scene. Otto isn't here, so anything said by Patrasche, nobody in the scene would have been able to understand except for Volcanica. Maybe she introduced herself and said something to Volcanica, and we just heard him say her name in reply, perhaps confused by what she'd said due to his senility. So, those are basically all of the ideas I have about this particular Arc 6 mystery. Of all of the options and permutations I've presented here, I'm leaning towards the theory that Flugel named one of the original Earth Dragons from Flanders Patrasche, and that Subaru, due to his as yet unexplained connection to Flugel, felt drawn, when choosing a ground dragon, to one that was very similar to Flugel's faithful dragon, and gave her the same name. Whether she is the same dragon, or a reincarnation or something, I don't really know how convinced I am either way about that yet. I do think that of the mysteries we've seen introduced at the end of this arc, this is probably unlikely to be one we'll see the answer to immediately when the story starts up again. I think it will be something that becomes apparent much later on when some of the big, series-defining mysteries around Flugel's identity in relationship to Subaru are explored. But what do you think? Are there any theories about this that you have that I haven't thought of? Any interesting ground dragon related lore? What do you think the connection is between lovely Patrasche and Volcanica? Let me know in the comments. I'll be uploading more Arc 6 mysteries in the coming days, as well as some other, less Arc 6 focused ReZero content, so please subscribe and ring the bell if you want to see those videos when they're uploaded. If you're in the mood for some more Arc 6 speculation right now, you could also check out my video about Scarfdonna and Echidna, or my Gluttony If video. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you again very soon.